Calls for police reform have amplified in recent years, most notably in 2020, when the death of George Floyd while in custody spurred nationwide protests. Floyd was a black man killed by a white officer, and the demonstrations demanded attention to racial injustice in policing. Since then, the community conversation in Palo Alto has focused on ways to improve law enforcement operations. But data on police stops from the first 3 months of 2022, which amounts to 962 stops, shows discrepancies persist when it comes to race. According to the data, people perceived to be Black or Hispanic were stopped at a higher rate compared to their population in Palo Alto. Black individuals make up less than 2% of the city's population, but made up more than 11% of the stops based on what police reported. Nearly a third of the police stops involved an individual whom the officer perceived to be Hispanic, even though the city's Hispanic population is about 5.7%. On the opposite end of the spectrum, white individuals make up a majority of the city's population at 56%, but comprise 35% of the reported stops. And Asian individuals make up 33% of the city's population, but make up 8% of the reported stops. Of the 110 stops involving people perceived as Black, 25 of those cases involved the person getting searched, or a 22.7% rate. This stands in stark contrast to other racial groups. Officers did searches on 11.8% of people perceived as white, 9% of people perceived as Hispanic, and 13% of people perceived as Asian. Most of the 962 stops were for traffic violations. The data showed these violations made up 83% of stops for people classified by police as Asian. It went down to 76.8% for people perceived as Hispanic, 68.3% for people perceived as white, and 60% for people perceived as Black. On the other hand, people identified by police as Black were more likely to be stopped based on a reasonable suspicion or other reasons not related to traffic, such as warrants and consensual encounters. This contrasts with 20.4% for white individuals, 18.6% for Hispanic individuals, and 14.2% for Asian individuals. Reasons for suspicion vary. Some examples from the Palo Alto data include a person who was cited for twirling a large knife near City Hall and a Black woman stopped near Stanford Shopping Center because police suspected the car she was in was involved in a burglary. The data was collected by the police department and sent to the State Department of Justice in April. This was required under a 2015 law called the Racial and Identity Profiling Act. It included information on race, gender, age, reason for stop, and actions taken by officers. The Palo Alto Weekly obtained the data through a Public Records Act request. Click the video description for a link to the complete map where you can view the more than 900 calls.